Before President Obama revealed his Afghanistan-Pakistan policy to the whole world this morning, he briefed congressional leaders about it. It's protocol, it's professional courtesy, it's good manners, probably a good way to make policy. But guess who didn't show? Senate Republicans. I know, shocking, shocking. Senators Mitch McConnell and Jon Kyl said they received their invitations too late and couldn't move around their schedules. To hear the commander-in-chief explain America's biggest foreign policy initiative. Dog ate my homework? Weak. The Republican senator's absence may be one sign of a partisan divide over foreign policy. Another big red siren flashing above 48-point type reading partisan divide over foreign policy involves the neocons. Remember the neocons? Neocon. What a double entendre that turned out to be, right? The neocons developed and then sold the country on the worst foreign policy blunder of at least a generation. That would be the don't kid yourself, it's still going on war in Iraq. And if you think a world-altering debacle like Iraq would send the neocons into other lines of work, behold, the Foreign Policy Initiative. It's a new non-profit think tank, and this one is a lot like their old one, the now disbanded Project for a New American Century. The Foreign Policy Initiative is headed up by, you guessed it, Bill Kristol, Robert Kagan, and Dan Sr., all neoconservative Hall of Famers. So while the Foreign Policy Initiative is a more innocuous and less presumptuous name than Project for a New American Century, I urge you to approach with caution. Keep your fingers inside the tram. Here's how the Foreign Policy Initiative describes what they will promote. Quote, continued U.S. engagement, diplomatic, economic, and military in the world. Promoting U.S. military engagement in the world. Hi, neocons. I see you hiding there. The group also wants, quote, U.S. leadership working to spread political and economic freedom. For the record, spreading freedom? I think America would like to have a chance to vote on that next time. The FPI's mission statement says, quote, there are those who hope we can just return to normalcy, to pre-9/11 levels of defense spending and pre-9/11 tactics. Who are the those they're talking about? Mitch McConnell? Jon Kyl? Charter member Dan Sr. said to Foreign Policy magazine, quote, we believe it is exactly the wrong time to demote America's role in the world. Who's demoting America's role in the world exactly? The administration is using the State Department and the military, even the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Justice. They're sending special envoys all over the globe to engage in diplomacy. They've stopped talking smack about the United Nations. Where's this Diminish America coalition and who's in it? On Tuesday, the neocons' new group will host John McCain for their first public event. It's titled Afghanistan, Planning for Success. From you guys? Matt Duss of Think Progress translated the title from neocon into English, whereupon it reads, Afghanistan, dealing with the huge problems created by many of the people on this very stage. Joining us now is Matt Duss, National Security Editor for thinkprogress.org. Matt, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks, Rachel.
Let me give you a chance to explain that line I just quoted from you. How is the Afghanistan and Pakistan war dealing with the mess created by the neocons?
Well, there's a broad consensus among national security analysts and NGOs that because of the diversion of troops, resources, and importantly, administration attention from the war in Afghanistan beginning in 2002 toward the war in Iraq, that's really what eventually allowed the Taliban to regroup in the Pakistan-Afghanistan border area, and which allowed Afghanistan to fall back into insurgency, which we now have to go back and deal with.
Matt, you know a lot about national security. I know you're based in Washington with Think Progress. Here's the thing I don't understand about D.C. and national security policy. Why is it that people who are catastrophically wrong about big important things like foreign policy and war never flunk out of that as a subject? They just it doesn't affect our judgment of them apparently at all for the next things they want to do.
I think that's a great question, Rachel. I ask myself that question all the time. And there seems to be this special dispensation in American foreign policy that as long as you are wrong on the side of more military force, then all is forgiven. I mean, you can't be wrong in deciding to use less force. As long as you make these huge errors in favor of more military action, then eventually you're forgiven and you're allowed back into the conversation, and everyone just forgets about it.
Does that mean that when the Foreign Policy Initiative, this group that they've just founded, define themselves as supporting an increased defense budget, that means that they will inevitably find defense industry sponsors who are going to put them up in like swanky digs and pay for their conferences?
Well, of course. As I wrote, I mean, the way it works in Washington, if you're arguing for more military intervention, which necessitates more military expenditures, you're always going to find someone to fund your think tank. But I should also note that the fact that they shut down the Project for a New American Century and started up this new, very innocuous-sounding foreign policy initiative at least says to me that they understand that they have something of an image problem. So they do have some relation to reality. So I think that's encouraging.
The shame thing is still working. That's a good sign. Well, Bill Kristol and Robert Kagan today praised Obama's Afghanistan announcement. So given that, and given that they're founding this new group, and we've seen what their mission statement is, Matt, where do you expect to find the partisan divide on war and foreign policy now?
Well, I think if you look at what Kristol and Kagan have been writing since the mid-'90s, they had a pretty famous piece called Toward a Neo-Reaganite Foreign Policy. I mean, you know how conservatives and Republicans are with Reagan. They have this huge Reagan thing, and their whole argument was that America needs, to use its military power to get out there in the world and be a force for good and kind of go out there and transform the world. And this is what George W. Bush seized upon after 9/11. And it's worth pointing out that the program that Obama laid out today, and even what we ended up doing in Iraq, represented a pretty forthright refutation of the entire war on terror ideology that the neoconservatives kind of gave to us. This idea that we don't negotiate with our enemies, we defeat our enemies. As we learned in Iraq, no, in fact, we do negotiate with our enemies. We pay them enormous sums of money not to fight us, and that's what we're going to attempt to do in Afghanistan, to reach out to our enemies and see if we can reconcile.
Well, these guys will try to get in on it somehow and claim credit for other people's ideas when they can, and they'll be well funded the whole time they do it. That's what I predict. Matt Duss, National Security Editor for ThinkProgress.org. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Matt.
Thank you, Rachel.